Obviously, we've never been put in a situation like this before, and everything happened, but it was, how do we respond now?
This past year has taught me that nothing can be done alone.
We all just became like a whole family, and we are able to like understand each other without really saying words.
Good afternoon, and thanks so much for joining me for this special here on Local 4 Plus, dedicated to marking 1 year since our entire community was shaken by the violence at Oxford High School. This is not a day to look back and relive what happened, but to look at how we have all changed in this past year, the journey of grief, the way students have come together, the policies of safety that impact all of our schools, and the next steps to healing. We realize that anniversaries are difficult for many reasons, and today we remember the families of Hannah St. Juliana, Justin Schilling, Madison Baldwin, and Tate Meyer, as well as those injured in the shooting and all of the students, teachers, and families who continue to process all that they have endured. We do start in Oxford this afternoon, though, with more on Marking a Day. Our Sean Lay is there live. Sean?
Christy, we're in the heart of Oxford right now, South Washington Street right behind me. And you're right, today, very somber. Today's about remembering here for this town, the 4 beautiful lives that were lost, but also this town sticking together and taking one step forward on this year anniversary. Part of that is this wall here of stars here, trying to bring some brightness to Oxford on this anniversary. People from all over the state have stopped here to write uplifting messages, some that stand out. Here, I'll read just 2 of them. Memories of our lives, of our works, of our deeds will continue in others. That's a quote from Rosa Parks. Another one says, don't worry, we're all in this together. And that is the sentiment we're hearing all over Oxford today. A gray, cold, and blustery day in Oxford, fitting the mood of this somber 1-year mark when 4 young lives were taken and lives of families all over this community were changed forever. Oxford schools and all school buildings are closed today. Oxford parent Andrea Jones says the days leading up to today have been hard for her kids, and today is even harder.
I think definitely having the day off was the right thing. It's just too much. And to be in that environment while all of this is going on is overwhelming.
There are signs of support for Oxford all over town, everywhere you look. This community marking this day quietly, an area-wide moment of silence at 12:51 when the first shots were fired, counseling services being offered to families throughout the day. A day of reflection, hopefully healing, and this evening, luminaries placed called Light Up Oxford with Love. Danny Gabriel owns Covered Wagon Saddlery on South Washington here in Oxford. As part of this community, he can sum up this 1-year mark this way.
I just feel that the whole community needs a big hug. Everybody needs to stay together. It's a sad day for everybody, you know. I think it's been hard on the community, families, businesses. You know, we're trying to all stay together and be a big family here in Oxford.
That is very well said there by Danny Gabriel, business owner here in Oxford. Up next, guys, that Christy, will be that moment of silence later tonight. Those luminaries will light up this town. Back to you.
I love that wall and those messages. They're really wonderful. Thanks so much, Sean. We'll see you a little bit later. You know, when faced with trauma like this, there is no easy path to healing. It's more figuring out how to continue when life changes in just a moment. Finding therapy and mental health practitioners is challenging, but a center in Oxford has been a resource for many people in the community. Paula Tutman has more on Oxford Resilience Center.
This space used to be a realtor's office before it became the All for Oxford Resiliency Center. Directly after that shooting at Oxford, the governor's office applied for a specialized federal grant, got one, and now this healing center is open. When you walk through the doors, you're going to be greeted by Gary, the aquatic advocate, but then the services get really more specific from there. Calm, inviting, thoughtful.
So this room is, we use it for many different things. We'll do it for small mindfulness groups. We'll sit and talk to people in here.
The All for Oxford Resiliency Center has opened its doors, its heart, and its expertise to the people of Oxford.
As we listen, we'll develop our programs. We'll change with the community as they move through their healing process.
The doors open barely 3 months, and the community is trickling in to heal wounds from the massacre a short jog away at Oxford High School, November 30th last year. Next door at Grit Boot Camp,
Ride it down into a squatted position.
Gail Bailey is the life of the workout party.
Then we're gonna squeeze up at the top. You want this shot?
But in her quiet personal moments, she confides, sometimes it's been hard to function.
I couldn't sleep, and then, you know, I'm teaching every day, so I was like, well, maybe it's because of I have to get up in the morning, and it's just all those things.
The tennis coach at the high school, her son was within near earshot of the shootings, and one of her tennis players was injured, and she was traumatized herself and didn't even know it. But when the Resiliency Center opened its doors, next door, Gail wandered over and has become one of its biggest cheerleaders.
I have a therapist that I go and see weekly, and she's amazing. I wasn't in the building, but, you know, just absorbing a lot of the stories from my players, my kids. You actually do, you know, you have second-degree trauma, so I'm trying to work through that. It's, you know, again, I'm doing fine, but, you know, there are days that can be harder than others.
And you didn't even realize it until you went over there?
No, I didn't realize it until, because I kept saying, you guys know, like, please save that hour or 45 minutes for someone that needs it. And they were like, Gail, you need it.
With corporate partnerships from across Michigan, the bulk of the funding for the next 3 years comes from your tax dollars and the Anti-Terrorism Emergency Assistance Program.
When there are fees from when criminals are prosecuted, the fees go into a fund, and that's where this comes from.
These kinds of centers, sadly, are popping up across the nation. The Gun Violence Archive is a website that tracks mass shootings. This is a snapshot as of November 17th, the day we met Gail. A mass shooting is generally defined as 3 or more people injured or killed in a single event. When you scroll through the stats for gun violence, it's hard to miss just how many incidents of gun violence there are in the United States on a daily basis. On November 30th, 2021, Oxford, Michigan shows up on the rolls. 4 dead, 7 injured. Thousands in a community and beyond the Oxford borders are traumatized. But on that day, in this nation, in Georgia, 4 more people were killed in a mass shooting event. So here's how this works. The state applies for the grant after a terrorism event. The feds don't swoop in, but once the grant is approved, they are invited in to help set up the infrastructure. But the community dictates the services.
I think the Resiliency Center is just the fact that it's just there, and at any given time you can seek the help that you might need, whether it's, you know, they have therapy day, and then the dogs will come in, and so it's just, you know, they have offered so many things to, like, you can do crafts. I'll probably bring my tennis team in to just do homework, have, you know, have just to hang out, and, you know, we don't have to talk about anything. It's just a place that they can gather and feel safe and do all the good things that teenagers can do and feel good about everything again.
Much needed resources. Thanks, Paula. Oxford students also lean on each other to navigate this unique world as survivors. And some students have turned their pain into advocacy. That includes senior Dylan Morris, who started the nonprofit with other friends, No Future Without Today. Like every student who was at Oxford High School on November 30th, 2021, senior Dylan Morris is forever changed.
And we've gone through something that nobody should ever have to go through.
You know, the simple question is not so simple, but it's, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Trying to make sure that I am doing this work that I'm doing in terms of gun violence prevention, while also taking care of myself.
The ordinary life of a student, playing in the orchestra, sending out college apps. Dylan's also balancing the extraordinary, teaming up with fellow students to start the nonprofit No Future Without Today, advocating for gun violence prevention.
That must not have been easy, because I can only imagine the emotions surrounding what should we do next, and everyone having very different ideas about what to do next.
Exactly. There were a lot of different ideas of how we should go about this, especially coming from a perspective after the shooting when things are so tough. Trying to come up with how to create such an organization was tough. Going through mental turmoil and healing, going through grief, And so alongside co-founders Maddie Johnson, she was the friend of Madison Baldwin, and Rita St. Juliana, sister to Hannah St. Juliana, we came up with the idea of No Future Without Today.
The group launched in June with a 600-person strong march through Oxford, pushing for common sense gun laws, safe storage, red flag laws, and quality mental health care access.
Also making sure that kids are not falling through the cracks at school. So making sure that we're implementing social emotional learning into school curriculum, making sure that instruction is trauma informed.
The group also linked up with families from Sandy Hook in Washington, D.C. this fall to rally for an end to gun violence, and will now turn their attention to lobbying the new state legislature in January.
I hope that we're able to pass some meaningful laws. The moment the shooter gained access to the unlocked firearm and decided to use it in that hallway was the moment that we lost our childhoods.
Where do you find the moments where you can just take a big sigh and step back? It's a lot of work for a year, Dylan.
It is a lot of work for a year. And especially as we're, at the point of the anniversary right now, it's been really tough for a lot of our community members trying to balance this activism as well as taking a breather because activism is very, very exhausting work.
Exhausting. But Dylan and his friends feel it is their generation's rallying cry to make change. As for marking the day this week,
it's going to be tough for many people, but we're going to take it day by day, being together.
That's the most important thing.
It is.
Yeah. Thanks, Dylan.
Thank you.
And Dylan hopes to expand No Future Without Today to other schools around the state as well so they can advocate together. Well, we have much more ahead as we honor the lives lost. We will be right back. Stay with us. And welcome back. School safety is on the minds of all of us with kids at school. And in the year after the shooting, there is a lot of debate on how to make schools safer. Grant Herms has more.
In the year since Oxford, how much gets spent on overall school spending has become a hot-button issue. In new numbers obtained by Local 4 from Michigan State Police, 150 schools, both public and private, spent millions in state grants on security in 2022. $850,000 on emergency response like panic systems and trauma supplies, $2.3 million on communication like PA systems or two-way radios, and $6.8 million on hardening schools, things like new exterior doors, classroom doors, and access control. In districts like Northville, they recently gave officers in 3 surrounding police departments entrance key fobs to react quickly to a threat.
The most explicit example that I could give is a combination of grants for school resource officers.
But those spending numbers pale in comparison to previous years. Those same numbers from MSP showing in 2018 and 2019, the state spent $50 million on improving school security before the budget was slashed in 2020 and then stopped in 2021 because of the pandemic, even though those schools requested more than $23 million that year to make their schools safer. According to legislative estimates, since Oxford, state lawmakers have set aside more than $500 million for school safety. But that money has been coming through grants or leaving schools to fend for themselves without a state list or hub for best practices or state-trusted contractors. The other big problem, the money hasn't been getting to schools quickly.
I don't think anything is ever fast enough when we talk about the safety and well-being of, the kids that we serve, the teachers that we serve, the families that we serve.
R.J. Weber is the superintendent at Northville Schools. He says the next step in funding for safety should be on real mental health safety, not just hardening schools.
The emphasis is on how do we prevent a student or a person from doing the unthinkable. Very rarely do we hear people talk about the collateral damage that has been caused by years of gun violence. Rarely do we really explicitly name that we have elementary children who wake up in the middle of the night and ask their parents, well, is the police station close enough if something happens?
That was Grant Herms reporting. There have also been increased threats of violence at schools by kids, and it has law enforcement working hard to investigate and to help schools navigate this process. I spoke with Oakland County Sheriff Mike Bouchard.
I think they see and know and understand better now. I've, talked to pretty much all the superintendents at one level or another. And sometimes I'm quite frank with them. I say, look, you've got to accept this training. You've got to look for ways to have kinds of activities that deal with potential threats and assess those threats and deal with them quickly. Because if you don't, the tragic consequences can be super large. And tragically, we've seen that right here.
I think what's concerning parents now and kids now is we're seeing an uptick in threats at school. And I know that you've been very vocal about that we've got to stop these threats and that we need to take them seriously, but it is a strain on law enforcement. And it's also fear-based in these school communities as well. What can you say about why this is happening and combating that kind of fear?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, that any threat is fully investigated and will be treated what it is, a crime. Whether you intend to carry out a threat or not, it is still a crime to make a threat. So for those that think it's a joke or it's a way to get out of a test or to do something disruptive, understand it will affect your life going forward. If we identify you, you'll be immediately removed from school. Consequences will attach going further into your life. You may be suspended or even expelled from school. We're going to present the report to the prosecutor for criminal prosecution. So there are real consequences, whether or not you think it's a joke. It's not a joke.
Our thanks to Sheriff Mike Bouchard. This has been a year for the kids from Oxford to find comfort and coping, and sometimes it's only with others who've experienced the very same thing. Sandra Ali joins me here to talk about how she traveled along with Oxford students to Uvalde, Texas. And I think this is a really amazing show of sometimes we can find comfort in each other who have walked this same road.
And we've talked so much about that togetherness, right? Well, everyone we spent time with, Christy, on that trip to Texas, no matter who, students, teachers, parents, they all emphasized one thing. They all said they want to focus on the future instead of dwelling on the past. And really the same goes for the families we talked to from Uvalde.
So she was able to narrowly escape through a window.
At 10 years old, Caitlin Gonzalez survived the deadliest school shooting in Texas history.
What does she tell you at night? Is she scared to be alone?
She's scared of the dark. She's scared to be alone.
What have the last couple of months taught you, Gladys?
To be grateful for our blessings.
Uvalde is a long way from Oxford, Michigan. In this small, mostly Latino town deep in the heart of South Texas, the massacre is now part of the history of this community, much like it is in Oxford.
I know it's hard for me a lot of days, and it's like these kids have their lives ahead of them.
Two schools, thousands of miles apart, without much in common, really, until now. After facing unspeakable loss and tremendous heartbreak, they share a common bond. One Oxford High School senior described it as being members of a club no one ever wanted to belong to.
Paralyzing fear, like there was nothing, like I felt stuck. There was nothing I could do.
On this November day, 16 Oxford High School seniors traveled to Texas. The mood somber when they first went to visit Robb Elementary, a building now set to be demolished.
So hard seeing like all the memorials and just thinking about like the same thing happened at our school.
On the plane, they carried with them mementos from Oxford. They made this wreath as a symbol of hope and healing. The message: time doesn't heal all wounds, but rather a reminder to focus on the future.
We all just became like a whole family, and we are able to like understand each other without really saying words.
This is all really about survivors embracing each other. If you ask students what this past year has taught them, you'll get a variety of answers. But the most obvious is they know they're all stronger together.
Oxford students wanted to do something for families in Uvalde, the way people from around the country rallied around them at a time when they needed it most.
It creates a drive, a sense of drive in you that you were helped by others, so you want to go and help these children, especially since they're children.
It started with a simple idea: make blankets for the families to comfort them. But that gesture grew into something so much more. While playing soccer, painting each other's faces, and dancing, these boys and girls bonded with a celebration of life instead of loss. Two groups of children who likely would have never met, brought together by tragedy.
And you know, none of us really knew what to expect exactly before heading down there, but obviously we did expect a lot of emotion. I think, though, what really stood out to us was that unexpected joy that they experienced when they were finally able to meet and spend time together and really connect and talk about moving forward, right? Instead of dwelling about the past.
Exactly. What I loved about it, there was some silliness. And I think in grief and trauma and trying to move through, you lose silly. You lose that frivolous part of yourself. And to see it come back with them together was really beautiful, Sandra.
It really was. And the joy on their faces was incredible.
It was a great story.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, we want to pause now because it is 12:51. There is a moment of silence in Oxford and around the state to mark when the shooting happened. And we're going to take one as well. Welcome back to our coverage of Oxford Strong a year later. Now, as we take a breath, we also want to look forward. There are lawsuits and a criminal case still to come in connection with the shooting. Karen Drew is here now with a legal look ahead. Karen.
And it really is important to take a look exactly what is next, because there are so many questions, so many people looking for answers. Now, instead of looking back, as you mentioned earlier, we want to take a look forward. We don't want to relive the horrific, heartbreaking scenes that happened a year ago. We want to take a look at the legal battle for Ethan Crumbley's parents. Now, there has not been a case like this where parents of a school shooter have been charged, so the entire country is closely watching how this plays out.
Paul Stablin is a defense attorney who worked inside the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office years ago. I sat down with him to talk about the case.
It's going to have an impact on how parents are going to act from this time going forward.
Let's talk about what they're being charged with and what they have to prove.
There's only two elements of involuntary manslaughter, and that is that the defendant caused the death and that the defendant, in causing the death, acted in a grossly negligent manner.
It appears that the key to this case is now really taking apart gross negligence.
Yes, exactly. And a part of gross negligence is knowledge. So you have to know that your failure to act or the act that you're doing is likely to cause death or serious injury to another person.
So what kind of evidence does the prosecution have?
The father said on the 911 tape, "I think my son took the gun."
Here's a clip of that call that was introduced as evidence in court.
And somebody told me that there was an active shooter, and then I raced home just to find out. Okay. And I think my son took the gun. I don't know if it's him. I don't know what's going on.
Now, let's talk about the defense for Jennifer and James Crumbley.
They're going to argue that that they didn't cause the death. Their son did. He's the one that took the gun. He's the one that brought it to school. He's the one that had it in his backpack, and then he's the one that pulled the trigger. They didn't do it.
Does it matter? They purchased the gun, they took him for training, and they didn't lock it up safely.
But that could also be argued, the fact that they did take him to show him how to safely handle a gun, like any parent does.
Okay.
I'm sure millions of parents in this country have taken their kids to the gun range.
It doesn't mean that they're a school shooter.
Right.
From your legal perspective, does it matter that the parents took off that night and went on the run?
Flight can be evidence of guilt, in the sense that why would someone take off if they didn't believe they did something wrong? Now, whether it was actual flight or just fear, because the instruction also says people can run for all different kinds of reasons, and it could just be fear.
So many twists in this case. Just yesterday, the Michigan Supreme Court delayed the trial of the Crumbleys so the parents' appeal can be heard by a lower court. Now, in that order, the state must consider whether there was sufficient evidence of causation to bind the defendants over for trial on the charges of involuntary manslaughter. But that causation is key.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I'm so glad you're defining a lot of these terms, Karen, because I think we watch this case and everyone's got an opinion on it, but when you have to look at it under the legal lens, and now we're looking at this delay, and that's got to be very difficult for families as well as this keeps moving forward.
It really is. I've been texting with some of the parents, and they were looking for a little bit of closure, at least short term, and now everything is going to be delayed. So obviously that can be months, and it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It really is.
Well, we'll keep watching it. We know you stay on it. Thanks so much, Karen. And I want to remind you that we are going to have full coverage from Oxford for you this afternoon. Coming up at 5 p.m., you will hear from the parents of Tate Myre and Justin Schilling how they want the Metro Detroit community to remember them. Plus, Grant's entire story on school safety in this past year and so much more. Sometimes light can be healing, so look for light tonight in Oxford. Homes and businesses will be lighting luminaries along the road to signify unity. And we're going to leave you now with the voices of the most important people today, the students from Oxford, and how they are healing. Thanks so much for joining me right here on Local 4 Plus. Take care.
Friendship and bonds are definitely the strength that they bring you day to day that you didn't know that they did before everything happened. It's a motivator. Having friends text you like, oh, what are you doing today? Or you coming to school? Just the daily checkups are just so nice.
It changed me for the better because I learned a lot about people I'm around, how I should carry myself. It taught me a lot of different things about me personally.
To be accepting and understanding and to keep pushing for change, even if it's hard. Like, we still got to get out of bed every day because, like, there's people who are still impacted.